Welcome to episode 73 of the Camerosity Podcast, the world's one and only open source film photography podcast. My name is Mike Ekman, and we are back with yet another exciting episode. Last week, we promised a lively discussion about Fuji and Ricoh cameras, but as we often do, we got distracted by the announcement of some new film cameras and got sidetracked, causing us to only scratch the surface of Fuji and completely ignore Ricoh. With this episode, we aim to right that injustice and chat about these two very deserving Japanese camera makers. Before we get to that though, let's do some introductions. From Yellow Springs, Ohio, directly in the path of remnants from Hurricane Beryl is Paul Reibold. Hey Paul, how prepared are you to survive a hurricane?
Well, I've got my peanut butter and crackers in the basement, and I'm ready to start bailing it out if the water reaches up.
Next, from Gainesville, Florida, is a guy who is very prepared for hurricanes. Is Mr. Anthony Rue. Hey Anthony, how do you feel about Midwest tornadoes?
Well, you see, that's how I came to live in Florida. One day, I was riding my bike with my dog Toto to see a fortune teller in my hometown of Kansas, when a terrible storm appeared out of nowhere. I rode my bike back home as fast as I could, but when I finally got back, my aunts and uncles were already in the storm shelter, and I couldn't get in. So I was left to hide in the house. A giant tornado came and picked up the whole house and whisked me away to the magical land of alligators, space shuttles, and fancy coffee shops. And that's how I ended up where I'm at.
And finally, from Sydney, Australia, where the biggest natural disaster is heat, blistering, parching, fiery heat all year round, is Mr. Theo Panagopoulos. Hey Theo, do you have to wear sunscreen to go outside even in the winter?
Luckily, not so much in the winter, but it depends whereabouts in Australia you are. If you're up north, in some areas you actually do. But I must admit, we're going through a cold spell at the moment, which is nothing compared to you folks in the US would experience as cold, but we're finding it quite chilly here in Sydney.
Well, it looks like we have some people in the waiting room, so let's let them in. I see Miles Liebeck is back. Hey, Miles.
Hey, Mike. Good to see you.
How you doing? Howard Sandler, welcome back, Howard.
Hi.
And I see a celebrity, well, a celebrity for me at least, but Dan Cooney. How you doing, Dan?
Hey, how you doing, Mike? Long time. This is a first.
A first, yeah. Dan's I've been following Theo, and I've been following Dan's blog for quite a while, and I've asked you a couple times to jump on, but you said you needed to retire first. So it sounds like you took care of that.
Yeah, it's been a full week of retirement, so I'm happy.
Awesome.
I've got a couple of other blog posts ready, so hopefully one of them will drop this week.
Okay. Mark Faulkner, welcome back, Mark.
Thank you. Good to be here.
I see Brad is back, and you know, Brad, if you read the show notes, we never actually got your last name. So do you want to tell us what it is, or are you like Cher and we'll just call you Brad?
I turned my video on, but forgot to turn my mic on. Swain, Swain.
Hey, Brad, how you doing? You could be anonymous if you still want to.
It's fine. It's good either way.
We have a Bob with no last name, no video. Is that Rodoloni or is it another Bob?
Could be SpongeBob.
All right. So we last week we were gonna, or not last week, 2 weeks ago, we were gonna do Fuji and Ricoh, and there were just so many other things to talk about. We really never got to Ricoh at all and barely scratched the surface with Fuji, primarily sticking to the instant film cameras, which I thought was actually kind of cool because, like, in a way it's sort of like compartmentalized, and I feel like we said everything we need to say about Fuji's instant film, from the Instax, the Ace cameras. I showed the FP1, the big peel apart camera. But I thought we would just kind of go over Fuji and Ricoh. And while this wasn't the reason we chose those two, as I refreshed my memory on the history of both companies, in a way, they're actually quite similar in the sense that both Fuji and Ricoh, which was originally called Riken or Riken, not really sure how that's pronounced, started off as non-camera companies. Fuji was a celluloid company. They early got into film and then eventually lenses and then cameras. Riken was like a chemicals research company, and one of their earliest products was photographic paper. As we know, Fuji is a big film company. That's, always been their business first, kind of like Kodak, I always say, is a film first company. But both those companies have histories prior to making cameras. My oldest Ricoh camera, even though they didn't use that name then, is a camera called the Ricoh, which is a little collapsible lens 127 camera. I think I read from about 1940. Kind of basic, but I mean it's solidly built. Reminds me of the Gelto, if anybody's ever handled one of those before. 127 film was pretty popular in Japan at the time, partially because 35 millimeter was just difficult to make. Film was still very expensive then, and 127 was kind of like that compromise between somewhat affordable but big enough that they could still make some images that look nice. So you'll see a lot of 127 cameras in Japan from like the 1930s or so. But Fuji's first camera wasn't until after the war, 1948. They started making the Fujica 6. Somebody asked, it was one of the last, I think it was last episode, when Fuji started going by Fujifilm. They always were Fujifilm. You know, their name variations of that fame changed over the years. At times, Fuji made cameras called Fujica, Fuji, as some of their later SLRs, and then, you know, by the time they got into like the digital era, they actually called them Fujifilm, which is weird because they weren't film. But pretty cool companies. I feel like are sometimes take a backseat to Nikon and Canon, you know, the big list of companies, but that doesn't mean that they're no less fascinating or have options that are worthy of discussion. So why don't we get started with some of the people on the line here? I want to throw it out before he just disappears, but Miles Lieback, I've always enjoyed your contributions. So do you have anything that you wanted to share or ask or anything?
And what are you drinking?
And what are you drinking?
Just sparkling water tonight.
Okay.
Oh,
Okay.
Sorry to disappoint. I was kind of racking my brain with both companies earlier today. The only thing I can feel like I can contribute is that Fuji made a few Leica thread mount lenses in the 50s. I don't own any of them, but I want all of them. And other than that, I don't own any cameras or lenses from either of these companies. So I couldn't say much. But
Yeah, Fuji did actually make some lenses in like a thread mount. I've never come across one before, but they did exist. Remember back then, Fuji was one of the companies that was still firing glass during World War II for the military. And after the war was over, the Allies looked for companies that could still produce things for sale. And Fuji was one of the companies, much like Nippon Kogaku, who started making lenses for Leicas. Now, I don't think they had the success. In fact, I know they didn't have the success because those lenses are quite rare, just like a thread mount lenses for made by Konica, Olympus. There were a few others too that produced Leica lenses simply because they were easy to sell. I took a quick look over at Camera Wiki's website, and it's not an extensive list, but they did have a couple wide angles, a couple 5 centimeters, a couple telephotos that were produced. And it doesn't give exact years, it just says 50s and 60s. But if I had to guess, it was probably right around 1950, maybe even 49, probably around the same time Nippon Kogaku was making Nikkors. It seems unlikely that they would have produced them far into the 60s, but I guess it's possible that it went up to exactly 1960.
they made 135, 350 millimeter lenses and one 100 millimeter in Leica
Okay.
thread mount. And they also made one of the 50s in Nikon S mount.
were they sold with any particular camera, or were they standalone lens sales?
To my knowledge, they were all standalone, but I'm happy to be wrong about that.
Another interesting fact about Fuji, more recent history, but they actually made Hasselblad digital for many, many years. The HD3, the HD4s, those were all made by Fuji, and all the Hasselblad glass was made by Fuji.
Well, didn't they make the X-Pan?
Yeah, they made the X-Pan, but didn't they actually buy Hasselblad?
Not that I know of. DJI did.
Who?
DJI, the drone company out of China.
That's where I was.
Yeah.
This would have been like in the mid to late 90s.
Correct. Yeah, Fuji was always the manufacturer of Hasselblad bodies and lenses for ever since their HD system came out up until DJI took over.
Howard has just posted an interesting point in the chat here that they also were really well regarded for large format lenses. I've actually got one of them. They're considered one of the better lenses too.
Yeah, like I have a relatively inexpensive 90 millimeter because it's f8, but they make a very expensive f5.6 one for large format. And I'm wondering whether they still make them new, whether they're still in that business. It's fairly recent, the Fujinon lenses in large format.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they do them lately, but they were
And,
very
and I'm wondering when they
recent.
started also. I don't really know when large format became a business for them, but
Bob made it. Bob, are you on
Finally
mute?
made it. Man, oh man. Got my Fuji stuff on.
I see that nice background too.
I was a rep for 20 years, so
You were my rep.
yes, indeed.
Sold me a lot of pictrostat material.
Yeah, yeah,
S2 all the way up to the S5, I think.
yeah. And I saved I've got a price list from 1961 I found. I've got so much stuff.
maybe Bob knows about Fuji and large format lenses. When did they get into that segment, and are they still in that segment?
No, they're not in that glass segment anymore. They were in it for years and they never let us sell them because they had a deal with DO Industries. It was the same with the binoculars. We never got to sell the binoculars. I've got some. Oh, I got to turn this background off. But yeah, they never let us sell that stuff. But they sold them all up until the early 2000s. And they were the first lenses that had the EBC multi-coating on them. A lot of that kind of stuff. At that time, Dow was a big customer of mine, and they would only buy the Fuji view camera lenses because they had the same coloration, so they didn't have to change filters like they did when they went from the Gores to the Schneiders to whatever they were using. So it was good glass, still is.
So if those were the first to have the EBC coating, I know like I have a Fuji 35 millimeter Fujika.
Yep.
From 1972 with an EBC lens. So they must have been in large format lenses as early as the early 70s then.
Oh yeah, they were even in the 60s, maybe before. They might have been making those back even in the 30s and 40s. I don't know.
Wow. Okay.
But once they were making film and started making glass, they were probably hell. That's what everybody was using was all large formats. So, but yeah, the EBC coating started in I think 71 or 72. What ST do you have? 801.
801. It's a M42 mount with LED readout, even before the Nikon FM.
And the cool thing about that camera is you could meter out down to a quarter of a stop. So there were the dots for each half stop. If you got 2 dots on, it was a quarter of a stop.
Exactly. It's really got a very fine gradation of where you are and nice viewfinder. I've got nothing bad to say about it.
Yeah, that was the first silicon blue cell meter system, so it didn't have memory. Remember how the old CDS cells, you'd have that memory, like don't point it at the sun and all that stuff.
It's also an attractive camera. I speculate that the XT series of their digital cameras might have been based on. It has the same kind of squared off pentaprism. And
yeah, I thought the same thing when the XT1 came out.
I have the 801, and at one time I had the 901. And initially I was drawn to the 901 because it has that really cool 7-segment LED at the top.
Yep.
But I don't know if it was just this one's in better shape, but the 901 just didn't really appeal to me. And I like the 801 a little bit better.
Well, the 901 was an automatic, and they had the LED readout. And if you sold 10 of those, you got an LED watch. And I got mine, and the first time I walked out of the store you couldn't read them in the sunshine. So the watch was pretty useless.
Yeah. Also, the 801 has a 1/2000th of a second shutter speed, which was
nothing else.
Not all that common in 1972.
And the fact that they still work.
Yeah, I mean, this one's in great shape. I mean, everything about it. I have the Fujinon 1.4. It turns smoothly. They had a weird lens. It was a 1.6.
Yes.
Which I don't know if that was like they tried to make a 1.4 and just couldn't do it, so they just did the best they could. But
no, it was cheaper to sell. But it was faster than the 1.8. So
it had a really convex front element, like it bowed out by a lot. And I always thought that would affect like distortion or something like that. And I shot it, and I mean, it seemed to do okay, but that does make sense that it was an economical lens because it just didn't feel that good to me, like it didn't really have any, when you hold a 1.4 lens, you usually can feel like the extra heft to them, the extra glass to it. And I wasn't always that impressed with the 1.6, but I wasn't sure because Fuji did have a habit of, wasn't there one camera that had a top shutter speed of like 1/700th of a second? that they did?
That not in the ST series.
605.
No, the 605 still went, yeah. And then the 600 series, they started selling it for what, with an f2.2 lens to keep it cheaper.
You know, the 2.2 though, that was one of the best lenses they ever made.
It was real sharp, but it
really,
made
really
it cheap.
sharp lens. It was cheap as chips. I mean, the thing, it felt like it was made of cardboard, but optically it was really, really good. In fact, they still sell for, $75 to $100 if you can find one.
Well, and remember, they made the 85 variable soft focus in in the thread mount, which was a direct
the Colander inside.
Yep, and that was a direct takeoff from we made that for the GX680 series, and then they made the I think it was 180 200 something millimeter view camera lens that had that same waffle colander thing in it. Yeah, and boy, they were sharp but soft, and it was hard to describe until you shot it. But I actually sold quite a few of those.
I just looked it up. It's the ST605N. Has a top shutter speed of 1/700th.
Yeah.
So I always wondered, did they try to make a 1/1000th and it didn't quite meet the quality standards, so they just said
no. That's the one they put the 2.2 lens on, and it was the camera was like $149, and it got you into the Fuji system. It was cheap.
The real reason they did it was because they were being honest. If you look at the other manufacturers who said their cameras were 1/1000th of a second, you put it on a meter and they're not 1/1000th of a second.
Well, back in the day though, because we always had a shutter tester with us, and the Fuji speeds were very accurate. They were 1,000th, the 705, the 701.
Which one had the infinitely variable slow speeds? One of them had on the shutter speed dial. It went from 1 second. One of them had was it the
901? I don't remember that. It must have been the 901.
Yeah, I think it was. It had there were no click stops after 1 second.
Right.
So you could vary it down to a slower speed. It was electronically controlled.
And you don't see 901s anymore on the used. You don't see them very often. A lot of 801s, and we sold tons of 901s, but I don't know if they didn't hold up or the people that bought the automatic just threw them away, but 801 people seem to hang on to them. And you guys remember the AX series, the first X system, which was a great system. It just, nobody wanted to invest in a totally different lens mount again. That's what always killed them.
So Mike, a few years ago, you had loaned me a Fujica 35 SC from 1959.
Yes.
And it was a perfectly serviceable fixed lens, late 50s rangefinder. The lens was nice. It handled really well. But personally, I've got this massive gap between that and my 680 and my 617. So is there a progression where Fuji went from doing these sort of, consumer friendly, budget oriented cameras to suddenly becoming like the go-to for late 80s, 90s, medium format, quality, interesting, weird cameras?
I feel like I have an answer to that, but Bob probably knows better than I do. I'll set it up and maybe he could fill in the blanks here too. But it does definitely feel like there was a shift in priority at Fuji in the early 60s. You started to see them get into a little bit more automatic cameras. They made a lot of things in the late 50s. That Fujica rangefinder I loaned you, you said serviceable. I think it's a great camera. I've shot a couple of the different Fuji 35s. There was one called the ML, which I have a review for. I never did do a full review of that SE. They had one called the, I don't have it in front of me. It's like the Fujica Auto Magica or something, which was a simple point and shoot camera, but it had auto exposure from 61. And then they came up with this poor camera. It was an SLR called the Fujica Rex. Everyone you'll ever
Fujica Rex. Yeah.
The Fujica Rex was a leaf shutter. It does have interchangeable front groups, so it's similar to like some of the Retina rangefinders where you technically can change the lens, but you're only changing half of it.
Mamiya did that too.
Yeah. The most notable thing about this SLR is it has two thumb wheels on the back. The Fuji rangefinders, you always focused with a wheel in the back, which is actually kind of nice. But this one, you also controlled exposure too. And it's not instinctual. Like, granted, I only shot a single roll of film through this camera. I guess maybe with time, maybe you'd get used to it. But having to program your thumb, like every time I needed to adjust exposure, I felt like I was changing focus. And every time I wanted to focus the lens, I was screwing up the metering. The camera itself is just okay. I didn't really care for the viewfinder. It does have an accessory shoe, but it's offset. It's just a weird camera. It's not bad. It's just weird. And whatever decision they made to design this camera, they didn't continue it. And there's like a 6 or 7 year gap between the release of this camera and the next Fuji SLR. And it just seems weird that from 60, 61, 62, they didn't seem to release much in terms of consumer cameras, 35 millimeter, I should say, until they kind of started back up again in the late 60s. So Bob, I don't know if you know any, like what was going on. Maybe they had a change of ownership or something along that time or whatnot, but there was
a bunch of weird stuff that went on. And number one, they were focusing on film because they were trying to get their film more palatable to Americans. So for example, Ed Spurko, who was the head photographer for General Motors, a bunch of guys came through in about 67 and talked to him, and every year they sent him a case of film, and he tried a couple rolls and threw it away, and then it got good enough to give out to the people in the office, and finally he started getting some stuff in the early 70s that was actually pretty good. So they kind of set aside the cameras for the film part of it, and then I don't know who was talking about the medium format cameras, but the whole reason they got into that was there was some president of Fuji back in the late 60s, early 70s, who had a kind of a ne'er-do-well son, and they bought that company that was making those cameras and named them Fujica and gave that to him to run. And that was the whole reason that we got into medium format cameras. So, nepotism. We ain't got nepotism here. We're all family,
The G690, the GL690, that people call them the Texas Leicas. Those didn't come out till 68. So while you were talking, I've been quickly jumping through trying to find a Fuji camera that came out between like 62 and 68. And I'm not finding anything.
Are you talking about medium format?
No, I have any format. 35 medium.
This is a 1966.
Oh, the Rapids.
The Rapid
okay.
D1.
Yeah, the Rapid with the motor one.
Yeah,
well,
D1
they were still making stuff. They just weren't making a lot of new stuff.
I gotcha.
And they just weren't real serious about it. There's no money in hardware.
Yeah.
I mean, we found that out as retailers, didn't we?
What do you got there, Theo?
I've got a Rapid half frame camera.
Yeah, that's what this is, a Rapid drive.
Yeah, with the wind-on thing at the bottom of it.
Yeah.
And then there was the Fuji Mini they had for ASA. They had different colored jewels for different ASA. That was also a half frame. That was a beautiful. I had a couple of those. There you go.
Oh,
God, that's a great little camera.
That's on my list. Yeah.
Does the Selenium? I've had 3 of them, and I keep getting rid of them. Does the Selenium cell work on that one?
I don't know how to tell. Just look at the needle.
Yeah.
The needle does move, yes.
That's amazing. I've never found one that the needle worked. So
Maxwell Whitaker is a listener of the show. He's not here, but Paul and I ran into him at the last Cincinnati show, and he had one of these, and he was taking pictures of people with it inside, which was kind of risky because I think this only has like a single shutter speed, but it's fully automatic. But yeah, it's a little jewel.
And then they came in like shiny. There was a shiny version. And they had colors because it was, like the ladies' camera kind of thing.
Oh, dear.
And the cool way that you wound it was you held the right side and you moved the camera back and forth to cock the shutter and advance the film. So that was a cool little piece.
It's got this weird wheel.
Yeah, so hold it like this,
and
I'll just move the camera. There you go.
Oh,
that's how you wind it.
Huh. That's crazy. That's way out there.
Now I want one even more.
We used to argue with the Japanese all the time because we once got a brochure and it said for maxi power and professionality plus, use this. And I said, Kenji, this doesn't even make any sense. And he goes, that's okay.
I don't know that I would have figured that out without you telling me that, Bob.
Yep. No, you wouldn't. No.
That's crazier than the Voigtlander plunger.
Because the way I thought you had to do it was you put your thumb on this wheel and
turn it. Yeah.
And that does work. But I did never consider that if you're just holding it and you go like this, it winds. So I don't know if you could hear it. It's probably not loud enough.
Yeah,
we can hear it.
Yeah, we can hear it.
Wow. All right.
Isn't that cool?
Mike, how are we gonna show that in the show notes.
I'll make a YouTube video.
There you go.
Cool.
Yeah.
I can't beat that, but I really like the Fujika 35 ML because
Yeah.
it's got all sorts of cool little features of the bottom wind, the rewind and being on the side, and then of course the focus being on the back of the wheel.
That was what they did. But didn't Petrie put somebody else had the winding on the side? Can't remember who that was though.
Oh, you're right. There is somebody.
There's a couple Soviet cameras that have it on the side too.
Yeah, no, I thought it was a couple of inch. Maybe that's a half frame thing.
It has to do with just it allows it to make it smaller. You don't have to put a dial on the top or a
Right.
folding camera. You just put the wheel on the side of the camera and then a 90-degree gear, and it works the same way.
The ML, the SE, and the EE. The EE is the one I have. Were very nice cameras, and the EE had a slightly faster lens. I think it's f1.9 or maybe even f1.8. I think some of the MLs had that lens, but the EE also has shutter priority auto exposure as an option and full manual, metered manual, which is very nice. And the shutter goes to 1/1000th of a second, leaf shutter.
Wait, did you say your ML goes to 1/1000th?
It's an EE.
Oh,
that I
the E.
have.
Okay, I was gonna
Yeah,
say because mine's only 500.
Same, yeah. And this is also an f2.8 on this one.
So you could buy the 35 SE with either a 45-28, a 45-19, and you could buy the SE with a 45-28 and get a 500th of a second.
Fuji made a rangefinder called the V2, which most of them only go to 1/500, but there are versions of that camera that also have a top 1000th shutter speed. So I don't know if those were sold separately or they just snuck that feature in on a few of them.
So you'll like this one. The EE, this is in 61. That went to a thousandth of a second. So the price list, the net was 71.97 and the list was 119. And if you got it with the 1.9 lens, oh no, this is the SE, was with a 109.95 with the f1.9 lens. And there were telephoto and wide angles for the ML, the SE, and the EE with either the f1.9 or the f2.8. They made both a wide angle and a telephoto with a little clip-on viewfinder. If you guys want, I'll if you want,
Yeah,
I'll
share
just
it with
send
us.
you guys.
And I'll have to do my own errata. Apparently, I need to read my own website because I do have the Fujica V2, which came out in 65, and then the compact deluxe, which was around the same time too. This is a really neat camera. They go for inexplicably high dollars though, and I'm not really sure why. I mean, to me, they're not really any better than any similar Mamiya or Yashica of the same era, but maybe people just like the bottom wind and the thumb advance. But I generally liked that Fuji tried different things.
Yeah.
They tried the side wind. They did the bottom wind for a lot of cameras too. They did rapid film. They did half frame. They tried SLRs. They made the instant films. They did the medium format in literally any dimension from 617 down to 4x5x6.
Mike, you reviewed a Fujika Flex. I can't remember when, but that gave me serious gas. That was a beautiful looking camera.
That was an amazing camera. When I first saw it, I said, "Man, if that was around, I wouldn't have had to buy my Hasselblad and my view camera."
That's a gorgeous camera.
The TLR, yeah, that's 50s, isn't it?
Yeah, Fuji or Theo, what were you saying?
Yeah, so I've got the Texas Leica, the GSW 693 Mark III. This is a fantastic camera, really low shutter count. But one of the cameras that I really, really appreciate is the Fuji 4x5, the wide 60. To me, that is the ultimate travel, little travel 6x5 camera. It's so light, it's compact, and it's just so accurate and sharp. It is really, really nice. The only downside of these is, and I think they try to fix this in this version, is it's got a bull bar around it because it is actually, I believe, the lens mount is quite delicate. That's probably the downside of them.
Well, that's exactly why they did it, because the wides couldn't fold. A lot of those cameras, the non-wide versions were collapsible, but you can't put the wide angle lens on those with the folding door because you'd get the door in the image. So I don't think all of them, but some of the earlier ones, they put that metal bar just as a way to protect the lens from bumps.
Yep. Yeah. That was especially the 617, because that was just a view camera lens mounted on the body.
Yeah, right, exactly. So, and last thing I'll say too is Fuji really did like to make wide angle versions of a lot of their folding cameras back then. They had the the 645 version. The one I talked about last time, the 670, I didn't even know, but they made a wide version of that too, the 670W or something like that, which once again is not folding. It just has a fixed lens.
I'm sorry, the 670 folding came out way later.
Yes, 2009.
Yeah, yep.
Yep, I've been working on a review for that one, which I hope to have out eventually. That's a really, really great camera. I'm gonna have to get a Mamiya 7 though and put it up against Theo's claim as the best medium format camera ever. I know he will perpetually tell me, yeah, but you can't change lenses, which is true. But you also can't fold the Mamiya 7 either. So I don't know. I'll have to figure out which one's more useful.
But when you've got perfection, you don't need to.
I knew he'd say that.
Mike, I was talking to Igor about that F670, and it has one thing that they warn everybody about that I don't know if you found it yet. The camera will actually fire if it isn't locked into the full position. If it's opened up and not completely locked, the shutter will still fire. And if you're not paying attention, all your images will be out of focus on one side.
I have not encountered that. Really, my only issue that I've really had is how ridiculously quiet the shutter is. You can't hear it.
It makes no sound at all.
But I mean, it's just that in part of it, it's because of how many different cameras I'm constantly bouncing back and forth between of questionable reliability. But when you're out and you're shooting a picture and you push the shutter release and like, it doesn't feel like anything happened. It makes you cautious to want to keep shooting it. But so far my test rolls have all come out pretty good on it. But no, I'll keep an eye out for that, Paul. I have not encountered that yet though. Yeah, anyway, so the Fujica Flex, yes, the typeface on it is very, very cool. It kind of curves over the top. This was, in fact, if you see where it says Psychosia Rapid, they even do that in the same typeface too. This camera's crazy. It has 2 shutter releases, one on each side. I'm actually missing the one on this side, but you can unscrew the one from the left and move it to the right. So you could fire the shutter on either side. But by far, the strangest feature of this camera is there's only one knob on the side, and the same knob both focuses and advances the film. So when you push the knob in and rotate it, the lens standard moves forward and backward like any TLR would for focusing. But then when it's time to advance the film, you pull it out and then you can wind it to the next picture. So it's like they kind of called it like a single control. So you can keep your hand on this knob at all times. You could focus, fire the shutter, and without ever having to move your hand, you can just start winding it again, go to the next image, do whatever you want to do. But it's gloriously complicated. But I said the neatest feature, probably the second neatest feature is it has like a little wheel on the side here. I don't know if this will show, but it spins both lenses. So this is like a macro mode. So when you are done.
Does it adjust for parallax?
Yes, it does. So the front lens kind of tips forwards ever so slightly. So when you're at minimum focus using the main knob, you can go slightly closer. I mean, it's not true macro, but I mean, it's closer than you're normally going to get on a 6x6 TLR. So they thought of so many really neat things about it. The depth of field has an interactive scale on the side so that when you turn it, it moves.
That's pretty.
It's very pretty. It's a very, very neat camera.
How did they forget all that?
I don't know. I think it's that classic example of they over-engineered it. The camera was so complicated. This one barely works. In a 12 exposure roll, I think I got 4 images that came out correctly. It's seriously in need of a CLA, like, any camera from that era would, but I don't know that there's anybody who will touch this. I mean, I can't imagine however they accomplish the dual, focus and shutter cocking device all in one knob, 2 different shutter release buttons, a fine focus mechanism, rotating lenses and interactive depth of field. I would imagine that this is probably beats out a Rolleiflex in terms of complexity. So I probably wouldn't ever get this one fixed. And even if I did, it's so uncommon. It's a display piece for sure. But if they would have ever taken this design and maybe simplified it a little and made like a more consumer oriented TLR, I think they could have done really well, but for whatever reason, they chose not to.
It's almost like a Zeiss type camera, isn't it? Where they just over-engineered to the
for sure.
How's the lens quality?
Very good.
So it's typical. Okay.
Oh yeah. It's a Fujinar 8.3 centimeter f2.8 lens. I think it's a 6 element design. I did all this research when I reviewed it, but it's been so long. No, I lied. 5 elements. It's a 5-element and 3-group Fujinon.
I was just gonna ask, size and weight wise, is it similar to a 2.8 Rolleiflex?
Probably heavier with all that hardware in it.
You guys talk. I will measure.
Yeah, I once loaned the 617 Panorama to a bunch of guys from Car and Driver, and they took it up to, they were testing the all-wheel drive Porsches, and the photographer put it in the back seat or behind the seat, and then was messing with the power seat and crushed that roll cage, and didn't tell me. And he sent it to the next guy who was using it, who was Junebug Clark, who shot for Jack Daniels, and he calls me up and he goes, "Bob, this thing's all broken." So I called the other guy and said, "You broke the camera, you didn't tell me?" And so I made him think for about 4 months that he was going to have to pay for the repair, but I finally let him off the hook and said, "Don't do that, man. Just tell me next time."
I think I've had 3 of them that had the roll cage was broken on.
Really?
Yeah, there was really thin aluminum tubing.
Yeah,
And
it wasn't much, but
the bad part was that the strap attached to it, so that it hung. Remember how the strap attached to the top of the both sides.
The roll cage, yeah.
Yeah, so when it hung flat. It hung, in the proper position.
But my sample camera went to the North Pole with a group of photographers, and they had all these, and I didn't even think about doing anything to it. And it was the only camera that worked in the cold. They're specially prepared Leicas all froze up, so they had to shoot everything with the 617. I've still got proof sheets from it all. It was a very well-traveled camera. When you show up with one of those, anybody who's got one, when you show up with one of those, everybody stops and asks you what it is, don't they?
I cannot easily find. I know I have a 2.8 Rolleiflex, but I can't find it, so I can't measure it. But it's heavy.
You could probably look. Can't you look up the Rolleiflex weight?
Probably.
You must have that resource.
If only you knew somebody that had a website that might have all this information on it. Yeah.
Do you have one there?
I didn't want to
Mark?
shame him or anything, but
I've never. You know what? Here's the thing about Rolleiflexes, though. I don't review a lot of them just simply because there's already so much out there. I tend to shy away from cameras that are well documented. I mean, I've done a few very common cameras too, but I'm much more interested in, the Fuji TLRs and, the stuff that is a little bit more of a challenge to find stuff on. So I don't have a review of even the K1000 Pentax. I don't have reviews of, Nikon FE, stuff like that, just only because I don't know what more I could add that's already out there. So that would explain why I haven't done too many of the rollies. I've done the old standard. I do have a Rolly Magic that works. So, maybe one day that could be kind of cool, simply because they're almost never found in working condition.
A 2.8 Rolleiflex weighs 45 ounces.
What's that in grams? For the rest of the world.
It's 1,275 grams. So in the
1.275 or 1.275 kilograms.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That makes it even easier.
The Fuji is 1.3 kilograms. So it's a little bit heavier.
Just a bit heavier. Not much though.
Remember the old Calamar medium format SLR?
Sure.
Boy, what a weird camera. Has anybody shot one? Are they any good?
Why were they weird, Bob?
The Calamar 6x6.
Who made that?
That's the Fujita I briefly mentioned earlier.
Yeah, it was.
That's right. That's right.
Calamar, and also one of the New York mail order houses, also Cambron or somebody imported them.
Yeah, and they painted it a really weird turquoise color, and it was very strange system.
So I did review the Fujita 66 SL, which was basically the same thing as the Calamar Reflex, and I quite liked it. I mean, it worked really well. I mean, it felt good in the hands. It has a focal plane shutter. I could see the appeal of them for people back then who couldn't otherwise afford them. If you go real deep into the history of those, you'll find that the Fujita was originally designed by Heinz Kilfit. They were working on a 6x6 camera, which never was made. And I guess the plans were scrapped, or I don't think anybody ever really knows for sure, but that got turned into the Fujita, which got turned into the Calamar. But if you want to talk about heavy TLRs, I know this isn't the Konica episode, but you got to go with the Koni Omega Flex.
Sometimes referred to as the funny Omega Flex.
Funny Omega Flex.
We used to call that in the RB, we called them the Porco Flex because they were so big.
Porco Flex, yeah.
So 2.8 kilograms, Theo.
Jeez.
To be fair though, I do have the 135 millimeter lens on it, so I do have the telephoto if it were the whatever the kit lens would have been, it would be a little bit lighter than that. But I think it just looks more egregious with the telephoto lens on it.
Terrible. The only camera heavier than that though was the GX680.
I was just going to say that the GX680
Yeah,
with a 200 with a 500 millimeter.
Nothing compared to the GX680.
Well,
I don't think anyone ever successfully handheld it.
Yes, I had two clients that used it car shooting, and they would do car to car stuff handheld. It was amazing.
Another thing, Paul, you can't do with the Fuji 680 is sell it.
No, I actually did sell the one.
Oh, you did?
Chuck Rubin bought it.
Okay.
And I only had to pay him like $112, I think, to take it, which was I consider that to be a net win.
Yeah, I saw one for sale the other day. They're not selling very expensively because
they're
primarily because of that. Yeah,
the battery.
I know Anthony's been unfortunately Anthony's had to drop off, but I know Anthony's been shooting with one he's had, and he's actually quite enjoyed them. I mean, the quality is just top notch, but he did say that they're just a pain in the ass to try and carry around to take anywhere.
Isn't it an issue to get batteries to work with them?
Yeah,
like
batteries are a problem. I mean, it was a great studio camera.
Yeah.
I shot it in the field all the time.
Did you
I
really?
did nature work with it. You could change bellows. I didn't need a view camera anymore. I had ride, fall, tilt, shift, and swing.
Yeah, but you're only 680. I mean, you're only 6x8.
You ever carried an 8x? I carried an 8x10 Kodak 2D in the field for a while with a majestic tripod. The 680 was light
compared to that. Yeah.
So what's the issue with the batteries for those?
Well, they don't make them anymore, and it was a rechargeable and it was a night
rechargeable.
So it's a specially made rechargeable. Okay.
You have to get them rebuilt, like with new cells.
But there was an adapter to take AA batteries. The problem is it was just AA's, and so you need to carry a lot of AA's to run it.
As I understand it, there was separate batteries for the back and different batteries for the.
No, just one battery pack.
But but he's right. There was a battery in the back to hold memory of what film you had it in, hold exposure information. So there was a battery in there, but it was a disc that was designed to last 10 to 12 years. Been longer than that now. So, and I don't know how you get to that. It was not a user replaceable item.
So I want to jump to a different Fuji. You had mentioned it in passing, Bob, but the Fuji, the FinePix, the S series, these hybrid Nikon Fuji SLRs, and these have the super CCD sensor that people today really go crazy over.
It was amazing.
Yeah. So do you know like anything about how that got started? If I would never guess that Nikon would collaborate with Fuji to make a digital camera, yet they did. So I feel like there's a story there.
Well, and the worst one was the one that had both Nikon and Fuji. What did we call them? Fujix. It was the Nikon Fujix. They had both names on it. Both companies sold it. It was just a mess, just a horrible mess. And Fuji, the Super CCD it was such a great technology, and they wouldn't listen to us. I always told people it was like a woofer and a tweeter. So you had a tiny sensor that only got high frequencies and a big sensor, which was the woofer that only took lower frequencies. And so, people got so much into the megapixel count, and it was just, it didn't translate into the Super CCD. And it had more dynamic range than anything. It didn't have the noise. You could do a 20-minute exposure with it. Everybody else's cameras were burning up, and the Super CCD didn't heat up. So it was a really great piece. And Fuji just didn't want to get into the hardware business again. And when they first announced that they were going to come out with the X system, they didn't call it the X system, but they were coming out with something that they were going to be number 3 within a few years. And all of us ex-retired Fuji guys, we just laughed our butts off with this. There's no way. And then they brought out the X system, and I bought one right away, and that's all I've used since.
No, the S series was the camera of choice for wedding photographers when they started to go digital.
Skin tone.
The skin tones were absolutely perfect, and also you could get both the good skin tone and a white wedding dress. So it was just absolutely. I mean, I can't tell you how many of those were sold, for that market, but it was a huge number of cameras.
Yeah. It was a great system. It just, Fuji just never believed in marketing. It's all about the product. And we had constant arguments, and we always lost because it was their ball and they got to make the rules.
Well, they were also Fujifilm. So, you know, you have a company whose entire being is wrapped up in film.
Oh
All
yeah.
of a sudden introducing a digital camera, it's like Kodak. I mean, it was there's got to be some internal combustion going on.
Well, we would get yelled at if we called the company Fuji. If you were around the Japanese, you had to say Fujifilm.
Yeah.
You had to say it. Couldn't say Fuji.
I feel like though, if you had a time machine, it can go back to maybe 1950, let's just say, and help them like pick a direction and stick with it. I can't help but think that Fuji could have had some really awesome cameras because they clearly were capable of great cameras. But then it almost felt like every time they released something good, they're like, let's skip that and do something that doesn't make any sense.
Depends on who was in charge.
Right. And
you
that's
get a guy who liked the film, and you got a guy who kind of liked the camera part and thought it was important.
Right.
Yeah. That's exactly what happened.
But you have to give them the kudos though, because I mean, from a business point of view, that they've been very, very savvy. I mean, if you look at it, who survived through, you know, film finishing up and so on, they were so diversified. They've repurposed a lot of the machinery now. I mean, aren't they like number one in cosmetics manufacture or something now?
And you know where that started? That started because they made cosmetics for funeral homes in Japan.
Oh wow! I did not know that one.
And that makeup is a little vial of it is over $100, and it's my best friend who I worked at Fuji with. His wife uses it, and she said there's nothing like it. And I said they're for $100 a bottle for a little, you know, the little makeup things. It's crazy expensive, but that's where that got started. You know that Fuji made almost all the Polaroids film, you know, but they made it to Polaroid standard. So all the Fuji FP series and all the Fuji peel apart was made to Fuji standards.
Oh, okay. That's actually quite interesting.
Remember, the Polaroid chrome film was actually Fuji film, and if you took it out of the once you developed it, it said Fuji right in the edge marking.
I mean, my point there too is, I mean, they've made some very wise decisions. They went down the Fuji X series cameras and so on, which are absolutely cult cameras now. I mean, they sell out within about 30 seconds of being released. Yeah. Instax is widely popular. Yes, people can them for not making a more advanced Instax camera, but they're just interested in pumping out that film. So and they're making an absolute ton of money.
It's not in their interest to make a better Instax camera. Right. Other people can do that, or you can get it back, or they're selling tons of. I mean, that's the success story of the century compared to all the other films that they were making in the 2000s. The Instax outsells everything, including their digital camera business.
Yes,
by far.
Oh yeah, that's a cash cow. They just. When they started it, we all shook our heads and went, what are they thinking? And, you know, we saw the early stuff, and we kind of laughed it off. But we were the pro division. That was beneath us. Well, it turns out that's where the money comes. So
I mean, they're very savvy to the point where they're very unpopular. Their film business, like the enthusiasts like me, that, you know, we want our Velvia, and, you know, it's not worth their time to make that stuff anymore. And, you know, we think that the people in charge are film enthusiasts like us, but they're businessmen, right? So
they're photography enthusiasts, but it's all tempered by what can we make? How much can we make? I used to get yelled at when we would sell, if we were back ordered on film, I was in big trouble if I was back ordered, because their goal was you make X product, sell it for Y, and make Z profit. If you screwed up the X part, that screwed up the other two, and you were in trouble. And I got dressed down at meetings for selling so much film, 220 film. They just didn't even want to make. So yeah, it was just don't mess with the formula that the home market has, and then you were okay. If you messed with it, you were in trouble.
It was actually interesting. You mentioned the quality product that they were sort of pushing with the actual Nikon SLR hybrid that I've got. It's actually interesting because it's had in the viewfinder on the ground glass, it's actually had markings where the portrait should sit, people's heads and so on, because I'm assuming that because the color rendition was so good that it was specifically used for portraits. But I've heard quite a few people that have actually bought cameras. We've got the same thing has been done to them as well. So
Yeah.
they really sort of narrowed into a particular type of technology and just sort of excelled at it.
When I started with Fuji in '88, we didn't even talk to the portrait business, and but that they burned 10 times more film than the commercial chrome guys. So that's where the business, that we became a portrait wedding company too, and we went. Us as reps went kicking and screaming because we didn't want to call on all those guys. It was a lot more fun to call on the guys who were shooting the prototype cars than it was to go to a portrait studio.
So, Bob, you weren't in the mini lab division, were you?
Yeah, I got drafted. Yeah, so I sold that as well as film and cameras and all that.
The Frontiers?
Yep.
Okay, I didn't realize that because I was buying chemistry, your RA and the C41 chemistry.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have a mini lab. I was selling it for the police departments and various hospitals that were using the stuff.
Yep, we did a lot. In fact, Frontier, I sold enough Frontiers. I bought my wife a new car one year with the bonus money just from the Frontier sales.
For those of you who don't know, the two leading mini labs were Noritsu and Fuji. The Fuji Frontier labs, and Fuji toward the end they were in all of the moto photos. In fact, I think
Costco bought nothing but Frontiers.
Yeah. So the Frontier mini labs were huge business and really, really good labs.
I've still got a lab in Michigan. There's a guy's still a friend of mine, and he's still got his Frontier still going a long time, 20, almost 30 years. But like I was saying earlier, I think one of the coolest systems that's ignored from Fuji is the last SLR system, that AX series. Made some great stuff there too. But it was like Pentax. The Pentax LX was an amazing camera, and the Fuji AX5 was amazing, but they just never got any traction because Canon and Nikon were just too dominant, I suppose.
Well, and they changed the lens mount when the lens mount went to the Fuji bayonet, and nobody else supported. Did anyone else ever support it? I don't even remember seeing a Tamron.
Well, no, Fuji wouldn't license it to anybody.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, so same problem with the new X system. It took a long time before Fuji let anybody else make lenses for the digital X series.
I have actually the 3 Zeiss Tuits for the, and those are absolutely, of all the lenses I currently own, those are the best. Those 3 lenses. They made a 12, a 32, and a 50 macro. And they are
real inexpensive too, right, Paul?
Well, I bought when I first bought them. It was when the X Pro 1 first came out.
Okay. Yeah.
B&H had the 12 and the 32 for $9.95 for both of them. And so I bought them both. And that was
the way to buy them.
Really good lenses.
We haven't talked about those, the Ricoh stuff.
True.
I
was worried this might be the second episode in a row we completely ignore Ricoh.
Remember this one?
Oh, sure. Yeah, the one with the waist level finder.
The one with the tiniest waist level finder ever made.
Absolutely useless.
For the listeners, that's the TLS 401, was it?
Yeah. It was great for copy work. On a copy stand, it was marble.
But what didn't it have a green? The viewfinder was green when you look through it. Was that one, or was it another version?
That must have been another one.
One of them had a beam splitter or something in it that colored the prism.
Don't you have to flip a switch to alternate between the prism because you can't see both at the same time, right?
Correct. Yeah, there's a dial on the side and it flipped the prism. And then the other one was this one.
Oh yeah,
this was an amazing camera.
It's called the Ricoh XRM.
Yeah.
And then what was the solar version of that? Was it the XRP, XRS?
Yes. And then there was I forgot about those. Yeah, the XRS and the XRP.
XRP, XRM.
This thing had amazing metering and had a lot of technology in it, but people just didn't think of Ricoh as being that kind of camera. But
dealers loved Ricoh because they were a profit line.
Yes.
They were not a line that you were going to buy from B&H. You were not going to fight the New York mail order houses on them.
Yep.
You might see them in department stores, but dealers could
buy them. Different models. Didn't they, Paul, make different models for the department stores?
Yeah.
Like Minolta did?
Yes. Yeah, they had different numbers on them, but
they made all the Sears cameras.
Sears cameras were Ricoh's. And the reason the dealers liked them was they had the best parties. Every year, the big camera show in the U.S. was called PMA, Photo Marketing Association show. And it was either in Chicago or Las Vegas. And Ricoh had a party every year that was unbelievable. One year we had the president of Ricoh was a guy named Ray Ohanis, and Ray was wearing a kimono, dipping sake out of a fountain and putting it in wooden cups and handing them out to the dealers. And it was just mountains of shrimp. I mean, the dealers just loved them. So consequently, dealers sold a lot of Ricoh product.
Well, and we used to sell when they were thread mount. We'd say buy the Ricoh body and put Fuji or Pentax lenses on it. You've got an incredible camera for a lot less money.
Well, and then of course they made the Sigma. They made the Sigma SA1, which was a.
Is that a Ricoh camera?
Yeah, that was a Ricoh. Yes, yeah, Sigma SA1 was a Ricoh. I can't remember the exact. It was an XR2, XE2, X something 2 that. Yeah. It was a dead copy of a Nikon FE, except a bigger body. I mean, it did multiple exposures, depth of field preview. It had a vertical shutter, I think, which was nice. That was a very nice camera.
But, and their business was the copier business. The cameras were a sideline for them because they were in optical, so they made some cameras.
I'm reading about the solar powered Ricohs, and apparently there was an XRS and an XR Solar. And the solar is a completely different camera made by Cosina. Both of them, it says, use the solar cell just to power the metering circuit. So the cameras are not fully solar powered. They just use that for the metering. But one thing, it seems like if you were to try and get one of these working, the XRS, if the solar cells are dead, or because what happens is kind of like the Canon Del Sol. There's actually a rechargeable battery. Like the solar cells don't make enough power to truly power anything.
Right.
They just charge a battery, which then the battery powers the camera. But in the XRS, it says that it also uses regular LR44 button cells too. So if you wanted to get one of these, it looks like the SRS is the one to get, because even if the solar cells are dead, you can still use the camera with normal batteries. But it's not clear whether the other one would. But I'm glad you mentioned the photocopier technology aspect, because I have a camera that I've been wanting to talk to that doesn't say Ricoh at all. It says Ansco. And you guys know where I'm going.
Is it a photocopier?
It is not a photocopier, but
it could be. You could take pictures.
I guess you could. You could. So this is the Ansco Mark, which is a very cool 35 millimeter rangefinder from like 1960. It's one of the coolest looking rangefinders I've ever seen. It's got this really cool flip up cell, covers a selenium cell. The back of the camera, the shutter speeds, the film speeds are this dial here on the side, and then your exposure counters on the back door. It's interchangeable lenses. They have 4 different lenses for it. And you're thinking, Mike, why are you talking about an Ansco camera? Well, this was actually made by Ricoh in Japan, because, do you know where I'm going with this, Bob, or no? Not yet?
No.
Okay. So Ricoh made this camera for Ansco because Ansco was owned by GAF, General Aniline and Film, which is a German company, who also made photocopiers. And Ricoh wanted to get a leg up on the technology, so they got a agreement between them and GAF to exchange photocopier technology in exchange for Ricoh making some Ansco cameras. There were 2 cameras as part of that deal. The Ansco Mark is one of them. The other one is a small half-frame camera called the Ansco Memo 2, I think. Can't remember what it is. It's one of those little like square half-frame cameras. That's also made by Ricoh for Ansco, who is owned by GAF, who Ricoh traded photocopier technology, and that's why this camera exists. So this is.
Did they make an equivalent AGFA version of it as well?
No, they did not. For whatever.
If they'd have gotten the Italians to build it, it would have been the Axis powers again.
Yeah. But what's really neat is probably 99% of the Ansco Mark M's were made for the American market. I mean, if you look at it, it looks like a 1960s automobile. I mean, it's got these sharp edges on it. It's got like a chrome grille. The body is made out of like this thin aluminum, silver. I don't even know what it is.
Is it textured?
It's textured. It's it's ribbed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is the film advance on the bottom, Mike?
Yes.
Like
it's
the
got
Ricoh
a bottom film advance.
Okay.
This has one of the We always joke about Soviet cameras. If you put a thin film base in there, the film transport will shred it. This will too, because it goes an entire film transport in about that far. That's it, like it's a third of a turn. It's not the best camera in the world to use. A neat feature is it's got 3 frame lines in the viewfinder. The telephoto one is red, the 50 millimeter is white, and the wide angle is green. And they color code it to what's on the lens. So you have a white ring on the 50, you have a red on the telephoto, a green on the wide angle. So I guess for people who need help remembering which frame lines they use. But there is a Ricoh version of this camera. They made it for the American market, but for whatever reason, Ricoh said maybe we could sell a few of these in Japan. And in Japan, it was sold as the Ricoh 999. So there's actually 2, because I looked before the show. There's actually 2 of them on eBay right now. One of them is in absolute horrid condition. Like it looks like it's sat at the bottom of a well, but then the other one's like over $300 and it's just not worth it for me. But super cool camera. If there ever was a shelf queen that looks really neat, this is it. This is a very neat camera. And
hold it up, Mike, because this is very similar looking, isn't it?
Oh,
yeah,
sure is.
That's the Agfa Optima.
Yes, the Agfa Optima half frame.
It's
same era.
This is 1960.
Yeah, this would be about the same.
Okay.
Something like that. Yeah.
It's plausible. The material, is it like horizontal ribs?
Yes.
Yep. I bet you it's the exact same material. Let's see if I can get you super close.
Oh yeah.
Can you, is that showing up on Zoom?
Yep. Looks like every instrument panel from a 1960s GN car.
So this is probably my favorite Ricoh, even though it's not actually branded a Ricoh. The other one that people tend to really like to talk about, besides the TLS 401, is the Singlex, the one with the Nikon F mount. And a fun fact is, even though they say this is the Nikon F mount, that's not actually true. It's a variation of the Nikon F mount. And that's what it is. You take the lens off, the bayonet, one of the bayonets is longer on this one than it is on the true Nikon F mount. So you can put Nikon lenses on the Ricoh camera, but you cannot mount this lens on a Nikon.
That's how they got away with it then.
Well, see, and I would agree with you, but I'm fairly confident Nikon gave them permission to do it. Like, I don't think they were trying to skirt anything. I think Nikon was like, fine, go ahead, do it.
Because they'll sell the lenses. Yeah.
I guess. I don't know, like, Ricoh was smart to say, hey, we're selling this camera. If you have Nikon lenses, you can use it on here. But I don't know there was a huge market for people wanting to put Ricoh lenses. Honestly, what's more likely is Nikon maybe told them to do it that way and said, we don't want your lenses on our cameras. Maybe that's true. I don't know.
Well, then you talk about copier technology. You know how deeply Fuji was into copiers because it was Xerox. Every Xerox machine was built by Fuji for a long time.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah. And outside of America, they were called Fuji Xerox. I don't remember that camera. What year is that?
The Singlex?
Yeah. I don't remember that.
61, 62.
Oh, okay. Is that early then? Okay.
62.
What was the first year for the Nikon F mount? Was that 59?
59.
Mike, was there a relationship between Tanak and Ricoh? Do you remember Tanak, the Tanak cameras and lenses?
If there is, I don't know.
Well, what was the reason I ask is I have a 135-35 10R, which is for the Nicorex. And that would have been about the same time frame as that Ricoh.
Didn't Mamiya build all those cameras though?
No,
so they built the.
They did build some. They built the ones with the fixed lens.
Okay.
The interchangeable lens.
There is a you're not completely off there, Theo. There is a link between Mamiya, the original Nikkor X, not Nikkor Mat, the Nikkor X SLR for Nippon Kogaku, and then the Singlex, which also uses the Nikon F mount too. And if you look, I don't have one in front of me here, but it does have kind of Mamiya-esque look to it. But one thing I'm uncertain on is, did Mamiya build a camera for Ricoh with the Nikon lens mount? Or I don't know. I mean, there was a lot of technology sharing there, but I don't know.
It was pretty incestuous back then.
I was just thinking the very same thing.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paul.
They had the Nicorex had that 43 to 86 zoom.
Yeah.
Right.
And a leaf shutter. which the sports photographers love because for basketball in particular, because they could sync it with at any shutter speed.
That was not a very sharp lens, though. That 43-86 Nikon.
The early ones were terrible. I just got in a big argument on Facebook with and one of the Nikon F only groups about that lens. The early ones were photojournalist lenses. They didn't have to be sharp.
Yeah,
they just had to be convenient, and they were that.
I've got a Nikon F microscope adapter. I'm trying to find somebody to give it to, and I haven't found anybody yet.
So I have here a Nicorex F and the Ricoh singlets. They look awfully a lot alike. Let me turn them around. They look more alike in the back.
Is the Pentaprism a different design?
No, it's exactly the same.
Jeez.
This is clearly the same camera. Like the wind lever looks different. The location of the exposure counter is in a different spot. You know, one of them, the shutter speed dial is all silver. One of them's black.
Cadillac, Chevy, Buick, Pontiac.
Yeah, I mean the actual look of the shoe on the front is slightly different. So there's enough cosmetic differences that either one of these two companies, Nikon or Ricoh, demanded slightly different cosmetics, or it could be one of those things where Mamiya had the hardware to build it and just gave it all away and said, you know, you just take it, you know, or something. So I still think like there might be hope that maybe Ricoh did make this camera, maybe just using the blueprints of the Mamiya camera, who also made the Nikon Nicorex. Paul was right. All the other Nicorexes had leaf shutters except this one, because this has the copal square. And how you know that is it literally says it right on the shutter blades. In gold letters.
Wow.
Which lens is on your Nicorex?
The Nicorex, I just have a Nikkor H50 f2.
Okay, I have the Nikkor S50 f2 on this one.
Nikkor S50 s2. Okay.
Does yours have the shoe on it? Yours has the position for the shoe, and this one has the shoe itself.
Well, you have the meter shoe, which goes on the front. I have the meter, which goes here. And then an accessory shoe, I believe, would clip onto the circular eyepiece in the back.
Yeah.
And go over.
This one's actually the flash shoe.
The flash shoe, right.
Yeah, fits on the front.
But Paul, would it fit on the viewfinder?
No.
Oh, okay.
It has the small square. There's no way to put on the viewfinder.
No.
And
I did all the talking about the lens compatibility. While you guys are talking, I'm gonna actually try it because I've never actually tried it.
on the shutter itself, it's actually marked copal square.
Yeah.
On the Nicorex, yes.
Yep.
On
Okay.
the Ricoh, it does also. They both say copal square in gold letters on one of the arms.
So the only real big cosmetic difference is the Ricoh has that on the top plate, it has an extra little bend in it, or one of them does. Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm. The cosmetics are different between the two,
but
it's exactly. Okay. So I have the Nicorex F, which is a normal Nikon F mount, and I have the Riken lens, and it absolutely will not mount. You can feel it binding. If I take the Nikkor true F mount lens and put it on the Singlex, it mounts fine. Wow. So I was correct. You can put Nikon lenses on the Ricoh, all of them, but you cannot put the Ricoh lens on any Nikon. If I had to bet, I don't think it was that Ricoh was trying to pull one over Nikon's eyes. I have a feeling Nikon said, if you're going to do this, we don't want your lenses on our cameras. That would
I agree seeing that now. I absolutely agree with you.
But I will say, though, I mean, this lens is very, very solid. I mean, it is very well constructed. I mean, it does not feel like a cheap lens at all. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and do any optical chart tests or anything, but I don't think it was due to your lens is garbage. Just for whatever reason, I don't think Nikon wanted another company's lens to be used on their cameras.
Is that a 1.4 or an f2, Mike?
The Ricoh is a 1.4.
Okay. All right. So yeah. All right. So that's the 1.4. The later Ricoh 1.4s are, and it was 55 also. That lens could have been made by Makina. Because
Makina,
I mean Tomioka.
It could have been made by lens on a Nikon F mount on a Ricoh body that may have been designed by Mamiya.
Yeah.
Can we find anything that Canon did on this camera in here, Olympus? Let's put some Fuji film in it.
That's right.
Where's
Oh.
Rotoloni when we need him?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Canon may have pioneered the metal plating on it or something. Who knows?
Well, but there actually is we're going off the rails here. There is a Canon and Mamiya. Yeah, there is a Canon and a Mamiya link. There's actually two of them, which is that there is a leaf shutter Canon SLR called the Canon X, CANONEX, that was made by Mamiya. So there is a Canon fixed lens leaf shutter SLR made by Mamiya, and there is also, I don't think I can find it quickly.
And remember that camera was also made for Bell and Howell.
Right. Yeah. And they were front cell. They were front element.
That was Pellix era when the Canon Pellix was around.
So I have a Tower 32B, which is a Sears Roebuck and Company rebanded Mamiya Prismat with the exact amount, right? Exact amount. We can see that.
Jesus.
But the lens is made by Canon. So Canon made one lens, and then look what it was called, Canon OM. They called it the Canon OM lens. So that
so enter Olympus.
It's not, yeah, that's somehow Olympus had to get in there too.
This is like an orgy of camera manufacturers.
Yeah.
Hey, but Paul, the Ricoh lenses were good, but they weren't great, didn't you think?
Well, the Tomiokas were really good. The 55-14 was probably the best. I mean, it was just a really, I wouldn't say it was the sharpest lens ever, but it had great rendering. Now, the other lenses, like they were pretty cheap, the 28s and the 135s.
And they didn't even sell them, and they didn't have much of a full line of lenses, did they? I don't remember ever carrying them.
Well, remember they had the EEs.
Yeah.
Because they had the TLS EE. So they had to come out with their own lenses for the EE mount. And I don't know that anyone else ever had an EE lens. Vivitar, Soligor, Tamron.
Wasn't there the Adaptol?
Tamron Adaptol.
Didn't they make an EE adapter?
I don't remember ever seeing one. You know, it was because in Vivitar, of course, they had the T4 mount, but then they came out with the TX mount when Canon went to the FD mount. But I don't think they ever had a Ricoh EE mount either.
But we can't really talk about Ricoh and not talk about the GR series compacts, which are super popular now. I mean, you mentioned the lens quality. I mean, they must have some sort of quality. I haven't used one, so I can't sort of, tell you myself how good they are. I've used the digital version, and the results are absolutely phenomenal. So they're obviously hit the mark with that form factor in terms of design, of usability and quality in terms of results, but they do have a bad reputation in terms of quality around reliability. They're fetching absolutely amazing amounts now, those cameras, and it's a real roll of the dice when you get one on how long it's going to last.
Anthony has had good luck with those cameras, but honestly, how about you, Mark? Does yours work?
It does. It's a little flaky, but it does work. When I first got it, it didn't. And I did kind of a quick clean on it, and it seems to have brought it back to life. But the issue I've had is I had one, if not two others of these where the any sort of electronics on it just went completely dead.
Mm-hmm.
Like it just completely died on me. This one, I'm afraid if I breathe on it wrong, it might do the same thing. But for now, it's still functional.
All right. So more bastardization, since we're talking about Ricoh. All right, we moved into the digital era. Ricoh made a digital camera called the GXR.
Yep.
So let me power this thing on for you. It's got a little retractable lens. This one has the they say 5.1 to 15.3 millimeter. That's crop sensor. I think that comes out to be like 24 to 70. So, it's got a detachable EVF, little rear LCD. I think it's like a 10 megapixel sensor, except when you push this button, the entire front of the camera comes off. So the lens and the sensor are its own module, which if you have this one, you can install a Leica M mount to it and I have currently a Summilux M50 1.4 Leica lens on there. So they made this GXR, not interchangeable lens, but interchangeable sensor and lens with a Leica M mount native. So, I mean, you could see it's the Leica M mount, and you just put regular M mount lenses on it. So this is the Leica M Ricoh digital compact mirrorless camera.
I had that version, but mine had the infrared module.
Oh, really? There was an infrared one too?
That was the only module I had for it was the infrared. I came from Kurt. So you got the good one.
So the idea behind the platform was, as you swap out the sensors, you're getting a whole new sensor. So in theory, had they continued to advance the system, the original lens, the first one I showed you, is only like a 10 megapixel sensor. They could have continued to advance the system and can keep releasing more and more new sensors. And you would have just had to buy them. I mean, how much really would that have saved you? I don't think it would have saved you anything at all. It's such a proprietary system. But if for whatever reason you just really, really, really liked this camera and wanted to keep the same body but keep swapping out modules, you could. So,
Mike, that was a big deal though to get a digital camera with a Leica M mount.
yeah, it was. But it is crop sensor.
The only thing close was the RD1.
Yeah.
Which
Right.
you also happen to have there somewhere.
I do. Yep. Yep. So we've been talking about expanding like new listeners, like attracting to the Camerosity podcast more, our reach. And I don't think this episode's going to do that. We've gone into the weeds big time here.
I don't know,
This is-
the bastard stepchildren episode.
yeah, there you go. We'll call it the bastard stepchild. So, okay, let's see. Low-hanging fruit. Are there any Ricoh/Fuji collaborations that we could think of? Nothing's
Just
ringing a
back in
bell.
the M42 days when we would get people to put one thing on and buy one and put something else on.
Well, there's a link to Pentax, which is linked to Ricoh.
I aim to please. Whereas you guys should see what happens behind the scenes when I record one of these shows. My room goes from clean to a complete disaster.
It's a pile of cameras.
All right, I'm answering my own question. I present to you the Fujica ST801 with a Riken lens.
There you go.
There we go. All right, I did it. This is a lens from the Sears TLS, which is the one with that cool, I call it the atomic logo, where it's SR in the shape of like an atom on the prism. We talked about this camera once before on this show, and on the Discord server, somebody brought up they had a butter dish, like something you put a stick of butter on with the cover made out of glass that their grandparents had bought at Sears, and it had the SR logo stamped on that too. So that logo was not unique to just cameras.
And isn't that also just the rebranded as another Singlex, right?
Yeah.
It is, yes. It's the
Yeah.
401, I think. It's not the one with the weird waist level though.
Right. Yeah.
You're right. There is a Ricoh version of that camera too.
Well, we're doing obscure stuff. I don't know if I can get this so you can see it. Fuji made a back you could write on. This was the X film camera series. And so you wrote with a little stylus like autographic.
Like autographic film.
Yeah.
I guess they waited for the Kodak patents to expire on that.
Yeah. But isn't that weird?
What did it just like imprint it into the EXIF data or something?
Well, that's a film camera.
Oh, it's a film camera. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah. It's a revolutionary new data back design which allows photographers to enter any desired data directly onto the film. Unlike other data backs, which allow only limited numerical or alphanumerical notation, the photo recorder features a basic light pen which enables the user or enables the insertion of any kind of data, including notes, symbols, names, messages, and more.
What camera did it fit?
Any of the AX series.
Wow. Okay. That's why you don't see any of them. They probably didn't make
Yeah,
any. They
that's
sold
strange.
9 cameras.
Yeah, it's like, okay, you did it, but why? So I think it was mostly for the high end with the AX5.
Howard, you were holding up a TLR. What was that you were showing?
This is maybe my favorite camera, the
The diacord.
Diacord, which has, I mean, it's another Japanese TLR. It's quite good, but it has the best ergonomics, I think, this teeter-totter focus thing. And I was wondering whether anybody it's similar, but not exactly like Flexoret. It's really a unique kind of ergonomic feature. And they make some rangefinders, the Ricoh 500 and Ricoh 519, that had a similar kind of teeter-totter helicoid.
Correct.
I wondered if that was one inspired the other, whether that came from anybody else. I've always been wondering where that technology came from.
Well, I mean, you mentioned Flexoret, but Minolta, the autocord had focusing
Well,
on
it
the
was
bottom
one
too.
lever under the lens.
Right.
This is two things,
Right, no, I
which
know. Ricoh like expanded it so that you could, it's like you said, it's paddles. So you're basically supporting the TLR, and either one of your thumbs could be used to focus the lens.
exactly. It's really the
Yeah.
best.
Isn't there a Grayflex that had that? The little Zero, what was it? There was one of them that had the two paddles you would
They
do
were
for
buttons. They were
buttons.
buttons.
Yeah, yeah.
It
They,
was
they
the
were
buttons
like
that-
Polaroid land cameras. You would push them
Right.
in for
Yeah.
that was a 35 millimeter. Yeah.
That was the Graflex.
The Graflex ones though are like one tiny little motion goes from minimum to infinity really, really quickly. So there's
those
not
were
a
made
lot
by-
of Kawa.
those-
Yep.
They were.
They were.
But the Ricoh, I had the Ricoh 500 rangefinder for a while. Now,
Yeah.
the lens wasn't all that great. At least on my copy, it wasn't quite collimated, so half the edge of the frame would be out of focus. But it did have that focus was very nice, and it also had a kind of it wasn't completely exclusive to Ricoh, but it had a trigger winder on the bottom, which was actually very nice to use.
What do you got, Brad? Is that a 500G?
It is a 500 GS. Sorry, I'm on my phone. It's a little hard.
Yes.
Cool.
There we
Now
go.
the later Ricoh 500, the G from the late 60s was a whole other thing. I'm talking about the big heavy chrome 1950s Ricoh.
Okay. I think this is like one of the Japanese domestic ones. But actually, I just thought it was funny because this one the lens is loose on here.
Now, I did have a 500G for a while, and it was a very nice camera, a very nice aluminum body with an inlaid leatherette that was quite attractive. The only problem was the foam, like it uses copious amounts of foam light seals, and they turn into goo, and I could never get it light tight again myself. So.
Yeah, this one I think the seller actually redid the foam. It's not focusing, but yeah, there's a lot of foam in there.
Yeah.
I think the Canon dial, or maybe it was the Demi, was the same way. Where like when you the Demi, yeah.
Yeah, it was the Demi. Those are terrible.
You open up the film door and the entire surface is one huge light seal. But in terms of Ricoh's little like point and I know they didn't use the term point and shoot, but that 500G that Bob or Brad just showed, another camera that I have used that I quite like is the Ricoh High Color 35. These are really quite nice cameras. They are clockwork, so you wind them up with a spring drive. This one has auto exposure. It's quite nice. It just the feel of the camera. It's compact. I got great results from it, and it has what's called a Kepler viewfinder, which is based off of a telescope's viewfinder, where you kind of look through it and the image is incredibly bright. It's not a rangefinder though; it's all scale focus. But these are very fun little cameras that usually don't go for much. The asking prices on them are quite low on eBay.
The second version of that mic was the next version was the AD1.
Okay.
Which had the spring wind also.
Spring wind still, yep.
But also had continuous shooting. So you could change it from single to continue. There's a little lever on the front.
What year's that, Paul?
I don't remember. 60s, probably
Okay.
late 60s. But this one also uses two LR44 batteries instead of the selenium cell.
What's that?
Okay.
This is the Gatling 72, which has a Ricoh lens on it. I believe
Yep.
it is made by Ricoh. Yeah.
Right here is the Ricoh. This one is called an Auto Half SE. There was also a heparin.
Paul, that's the camera, or one of those cameras is the one that I mentioned earlier when we were talking about the Ansco mark. There's an Ansco version of that camera.
Mm-hmm.
That's almost, I mean, it's not black, but it's
Yeah.
basically the same design. And that was part of that same deal. Ricoh made an Ansco version that they could sell in exchange for that photocopier technology.
Well, and everybody lost the lens cap. It was the lens cap is vertical and fits on the front. They're always missing.
A pressure fit. Theo has his.
Well, Ricoh made this camera in a bunch of different finishes.
Yes.
Including a black paint one that Anthony tried that had just horrible fungus internally. But they're really nice cameras. I mean, they're very advanced for what they did.
Okay, so another Kurt book. I have a Japanese language auto half cam book. That's
all the models. Yeah.
The entire book is dedicated to that camera and how it was advertised. It's hard to see all the different designs that they made for it. I mean, apparently they made this camera in thousands. Like here's a snakeskin one. I don't know what the hell that is. But there's an entire book dedicated to just all the different variations of those cameras.
Jeez.
Pretty wild. The auto half. Maybe I'll send this to Anthony because I don't see myself ever reading it.
Theo, I see your Texas Leica back there. Do you own any of the interchangeable lens 670s or 690s? Have you used those?
No, I don't. I wouldn't mind those, but I've got a Mamiya 7, so I don't bother.
They were a repair problem though too.
Mike's going for his.
At the wide angle. And I also have the AE lens too. So
Oh,
there was,
really?
There was a lens that has an auto exposure
Yep.
module that sticks out of the side.
I've only seen pictures. Cool.
Speaking of Ricoh making strange cameras, have any of you guys ever seen this?
Oh, the RDC.
Yeah.
Yeah, the RDC with
Yep.
a swivel screen. Very interesting looking camera. I must admit I haven't used it yet, but Howard, you'll be pleased to know that the swivel focus kind of made its
Oh,
way
wow.
into this.
That is insane.
Just a smaller version.
Just a very much smaller version.
How
Wow.
many megapixels?
Oh, I have no idea.
One.
Oh, there is a weird ergonomic Ricoh from the 90s. I think it's the Ricoh Mirage or something. It's like looks like a camcorder. It's like the Yashica Samurai kind of
It was
the
weird.
Ricoh Mirai.
Yeah.
Mirai. Yeah.
Theo, what battery does that take? Is it rechargeable or is it just double A's?
It's rechargeable,
Oh.
and it's one of these things.
Hope you have. Oh, okay. No, okay. That's a very common battery.
Yeah.
That battery, the Fuji that was made for Leica.
The
and also
F700.
Leica.
Yes. The
Yeah,
F700.
they don't use that battery. So
Yeah,
those are
lithium. Yeah, they're pretty easy to find. I just haven't had a chance to shoot it, to be honest. But it's something I'm quite interested. They use a really weird memory card. If I can get it up open somehow. Yes, here we go.
Probably memory stick or smart
smart
media.
Smart media.
It's
Yeah.
one of these things.
Yeah, smart media. Now you got to be careful with those. Unfortunately, you have one because they made two different voltages of those cards and they're not interchangeable.
Yeah, I can't quite figure out how to get back in now.
Oh wow.
That's cool.
So it's got a little display on top there. You can see.
Jeez.
Does it have a battery built into the lens?
Yeah, it's right there. Right by my
Okay, so
finger.
it's a battery. Yeah, okay, I see the compartment.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's reliable.
I posted on the group, tell me you're a camera collector without telling me you're a camera collector because I just stocked up on batteries. So I have a whole bunch of them here. That could be for the next Fuji show we do, since we can't seem to.
So the lore that I heard about the Fuji medium format rangefinders was that they were really intended for the domestic market of tour bus, like tour companies that would, they would take a busload of tourists to see the temples of Kyoto. Everyone would get out of the bus and they'd take a big high resolution group photo that they even made short rolls of film so that they'd only have 4 exposures and then they'd get it developed and give prints to all the passengers later that day.
Do you guys remember when Konica made 6-shot 120 film?
Yeah.
Yeah. But that was in the 80s or 90s, I think. So
Yeah.
That must be when the Fuji bought that company for the ne'er-do-well son. They probably bought it from the company that was making them for the tours. That makes a lot of sense.
I should have read the manual before I started messing with this Fuji because now I can't. I'll mess with it later. I do like that camera though. I sold to you, Paul, the GS693.
Yes.
And that's an okay
GSW.
GSW. And I like the wide angle lens on it, but there's just something about it almost felt too plasticky to me. I didn't enjoy shooting it as much as I thought I would. Really, if you think about it from a technological standpoint, this older GL690 is a more primitive camera, but I think I enjoy it more. I enjoy the balance of it a little bit. I mean, it just like the name Texas Leica is appropriate. It just feels like a Leica that's been supersized.
Just don't look inside because it didn't look like a Leica on the inside.
No, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure. So before he goes again, Mark was on 2 episodes ago, and we were briefly mentioned. It was episode 71, and you had talked about how you had longed for an M3, and you had finally gotten it, and it wasn't everything you had hoped it would be. and that you were thinking of whether you'd keep it or not. So did you ever make a decision on that, Mark?
I did. I opted to sell it, and it has turned into a whole saga with the person that I sold it to. And I had shot a couple of rolls on it. It was pretty, the pictures were nice. It felt almost too precise, if that makes any sense. I like the feel of a camera when the shutter goes off. You can tell that the shutter is fired. It's like, oh, this camera's in good shape. I'll send it over. So I sent it, and the day that he gets it, he's like, oh, it has all these problems. The shutter speeds are all off and everything else. And I was like, and so the lens is horrible, blah, blah, blah. I was like, I don't think so. I think it's, I didn't put on there, needed a CLA or anything. I probably should have. And so we bargained back and forth a little bit. I gave him a partial refund for his trouble. It's not worth fighting over it. I still came out ahead in the deal anyway, because I picked it up 6 months ago at a auction down in Southern Maryland and got a really good deal on it.
But Mark, my question is, having owned Leicas, why the M3? What was the mystique of the M3? Because I hated that double advance. I owned M2s and M4s.
This one was a single stroke.
Oh,
I don't know. I'd always kind of heard it mentioned as sort of the standard by which other rangefinders were kind of judged, but it just getting it reaffirmed to me that I will take my Canon 7 any day of the week over an M3. I know some people will disagree, and don't get me wrong, it took very nice pictures. The glass is beautiful on it.
You had the dual range too, didn't you?
Yeah, it was dual range with the goggles and everything.
Right. Now, I don't know if that alone would be reason to keep it, but it is actually kind of neat focusing as close with a rangefinder as that can do.
Yeah.
But I get it.
I just didn't enjoy shooting it as much as the other ones. So that was that long way of saying, yes, I sold it.
Well, Bob, I think the hype on the M3 has died down a bit, but a couple years back, there was so much like people talking about the M3 like it was God's gift to cameras. And I like mine. I just don't like it better than a lot of whatever, cameras I have. And mine was gifted to me by my neighbor who passed away. I mentioned this before, but I think, and I saw Mark's kit. It was very nice. He had all the boxes. He had the paperwork for it. He had the goggles. He had, didn't you have like a viewfinder for it too? A couple accessories or something?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yep. It was a very, very complete kit. And
yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, and if it was something like I had the money into it that Mark did, and I just wasn't loving it, I would have sold it too. I think any one of us would have.
I was going to say, I've said before that, I'm not the M3 is my least favorite Leica camera, but I did wind up with one recently that 2 years ago that I sent to my friend Robert to paint, and he just sent it back, and it's absolutely beautiful, black paint, flat black. And Alan has it right now for a CLA, but I'll sell it when it gets back. I just don't like the M3. I mean, it's the range, the 35 millimeter frame line is too important for me not to have on the body. So
I remember being at Dodds one time, and a guy was buying some special Leica. This would have been in the late 90s, early 2000s, and so I canceled a flight to stay there. I wanted to see this camera, and the guy came to pick it up, and I gave him a bunch of film, and he said, make sure you don't open the box that it comes from Leica in. And so I said, so can we take a look at it? And he goes, oh, no. I said, what do you mean, no? He goes, no, I'm not going to open it. Well, I said, well, how do you know what's in there? He says, oh, I'm going to go over to the bowling alley, and they'll make an X-ray, show that the camera's in there, and then I was absolutely floored. So not only did I never get to see it, he never got to see it.
Wait, so why would a bowling alley have an X-ray machine?
They always had X-ray bowling balls for cracks.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Good to know.
I had a buddy of mine who collected trains, and he had an unopened Lionel box, and he did the same thing. His brother-in-law owned a bowling alley, and he'd take it over there, and then he would get a copy of the X-ray, and then when he would sell it, he'd say, see, it's all in there. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, it's that time we should start winding down. Couple quick things. After the last episode, we had talked about the Fuji instant cameras, the Ace cameras, and Kyle Liu posted on the Discord that the guy who modifies Fujifilm, the Photorama Ace instant cameras, his name is Kenneth Panda, and he says that guy sells conversion kits for Instax film for about $120. He says that the kits work on all Photorama cameras. And then there's one called the Photorama MX 900, which can also be modified to take Instax wide. So if you want to put back in service a Fuji Ace instant camera. There is a kit sold by Kenneth Panda. I wanted to at least call out Patrick Rapps was talking about we were talking about panoramic cameras. He had his baby L Vista, and he got it working and posted a video on our Facebook page showing how the shutter speeds are delayed by putting in like a metal fan almost, and it spins as the shutter is moving, and that's what slows down so that you get your different shutter speeds, which is just far out. But I liked the video that he shared. And then the last one was a question that I've never had anybody ask before. It was from the Discord. It was MAMP. I see this guy posts all the time, and I honestly don't know what his real name is. But he asked a question. Instead of what's your favorite camera, he asks, which camera do you most regret not taking out more often? And I think that's a good question because we all have cameras that we know we want to use more. We just don't get a chance to use. So real quick lightning round for what few of us are left. Theo, is there a camera that you have? So it can't be the Mamiya 7 because we know you use that all the time. You have that you just feel guilty. Like, I really wish I shot this camera more.
Probably my M2. I probably should take
M2.
that out a lot more than I should.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot too. Mark, do you have anything that fits that category?
Yeah, Pentax ME Super. I bought one of the first cameras I ever bought, used it a bunch, and then as I've gotten more and more, it's kind of sat on the shelf, and I wish I used it more often.
Yeah.
So tiny.
Howard?
Well, I just shot my Fujica 35EE, and now I got to start hunting for those accessories.
Bob, I never actually asked you. We know your background, but do you actively still shoot film?
I don't shoot much film now. I sold most of my collection back after I left Fuji, they never asked for any of the sample cameras back. So I made a ton of money selling all my sample cameras. Okay. And then I sold my 4x5 and my 8x10. So I still got a few of like my parents' cameras, and probably my prized possession, because I still have film in the freezer, is my 1903 116 Kodak, because it's got a coupled rangefinder. And but you know, soup in the film and all, it's kind of a pain. So
Brad, are you still there? Do you have one?
Yeah, I was actually just going to grab it. So it's digital.
It's okay.
I have an IR converted Nikon. What is this? D80. I don't know. I bought it to try to play around with infrared, and I have a hard time finding subjects that work.
Yeah.
Is it infrared or full spectrum, Brad?
It's infrared only. It's the like 700 nanometer or whatever. So it actually, the pictures come out like natively black and white.
It's got the Rat 87C filter on it somewhere, basically.
Yeah, basically.
Did they put it over the sensor then?
Yeah, it's from a company that does conversions, and basically they remove the filter that's on the camera and install a new filter. You can they have a bunch of different options. You can do full spectrum, you can do like IR only.
That's much more common. Usually when people say they're shooting IR, but they're saying it wrong. They're actually shooting full spectrum and then just putting an IR filter on the lens.
The advantage of putting it over the sensor is you've got an optical viewfinder that you can use.
Right.
Yeah, I know they also do mirrorless conversions, which I know they're supposed to be really, really good because you are seeing like exactly what you're going to get.
Yeah, the Lumixes seem to be very popular in that regard. They get converted often. Yeah.
Fuji actually was making infrared DSLRs. We made those for a while. Remember those, Paul?
Sure. Yeah, we sold them for law enforcement.
Right. Yep.
Mark and I's friend, Adam Paul, for a while there was buying up all the Lumixes he could find because he said of all the digicams that he had, not that he's tried everyone that's ever been made, but of the ones he tried, he found the Lumixes to be pretty straightforward to modify for full spectrum. So did he ever give one to you, Mark? Because he sent one to me.
I did one myself, and then also remember
we
had that Sony 828 where you could put the magnet, on the side to get to go. Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, that's a great camera. That's one of my sleepers in that it's got a Zeiss f2 Vario sonar lens, 8 megapixel CCD sensor. So it has the great color similar to Fuji's, the fine pics, but then you could at will turn on full spectrum and turn it back off without doing anything inside the camera.
Wow.
Yeah, check out my review. It's called the Sony DSC F828. I always remember that because Kodak used to have 828 film, but it's the Sony DSC-F 828. I show samples of the camera, both in full spectrum with an IR filter, and then just completely unmodified. And then it's really because where the technology came from was at the time Sony made that camera, they were doing the handy cams, and they had a couple camcorders that had what they called night vision. So you could record people at night. Supposed urban legend was they turned it off because you could see through people's clothing sometimes.
So teenage boys were trying to buy them?
Yes, exactly. But that technology they incorporated into a couple of their digital cameras, and through complete fluke, the way it works is it electronically moves a filter in and out of the way of the sensor, but that filter is on like a lever that swings out of the way. And if you happen to put a magnet in just the right spot on the camera, you end up pulling the sensor out of the way, or the filter out of the way of the sensor. So now the sensor is full spectrum, and you could do that at any time. So pretty neat camera.
Something I wanted to ask was, I was at an estate sale and I saw a Bantam special, but it was really beat up. Should I have bought it? What are they? Are they worth anything?
Yeah, their Bantam specials are
even beat up.
Well,
depends how bad, but I mean, if it's at least displayable. Yeah, if it's displayable, people love the Teague, the Walter Derwin Teague design. They love the pinstripes. They are attractive cameras. They have great lenses. They just suck because for how good of a camera they are, if you're using 828, you only get 8 exposures out of it.
Yeah.
Well,
if the Bakelite isn't cracked, they're worth. I mean, a beat up one is still $200.
Oh,
well, it's not Bakelite, Paul. It's all metal.
It's all metal. It's just that it was an enamel. It's an enamel.
Oh, right. It's enamel over the top.
It was scratched up. Yeah. Should have bought it. It was $5.
Yeah, no, $5 would have been a no-brainer.
Yeah.
If you ever find a Bantam special in the wild, check the shutter. Before the war, they had contour shutters, but after the war, they used the Kodak Supermatic shutters. There's really no difference in terms of performance, but the Supermatics are far less common, so they generally are worth even more. So if you find one with a Supermatic, that means it's post-war, and the value's a little bit higher on those too.
I run into Paul. I'll have to contact you because we do estate sales on a regular basis, and man, I found a whole bunch of Miranda stuff still in its original boxes of all these accessories, and I just didn't know what to do with them. So I don't know if they just got thrown out because nobody was going to buy them. Nobody else knew what they were.
It's highly unlikely you'll ever find this, but if you ever find a Miranda, see if it has the word Orion on it. If it does, buy it.
Okay. But I just, I love these accessories to just get used. And I don't, the stuff was super cheap and I would have just given it to somebody rather than have it go in the trash. Now my wife's going to kill me. I'm going to start collecting all this crap.
Well, and then to answer my version of the question, the camera I have that I wish I used more, honestly, it's not going to be that exciting, but it's the Canon 7. Alyssa Chiarello, who's another blogger who is a huge fan of the Canon 7, said that she wanted to shoot a Nikon SP. And she had never had a chance to do that. And while I love the SPs and I like the Nikon rangefinders, I said, I got to be honest with you, Alyssa, you already have the Canon 7. You're not going to like the SP more than that. She still wants to experience it though. But I love this. I think the Canon 7 still, after all these years, is still the best value when it comes to interchangeable lens 35mm rangefinders. For some strange reason, Japanese sellers still sell them body only for like $80-$90. I mean, it's better to have the correct period, Canon lens for it. You could put any screw mount lens on there. That is a great camera. It's got a great viewfinder. The only really bad thing about it is it doesn't have a shoe. So if you have a need for a shoe, you're kind of out of luck unless you like clip something onto it. But or you get, what was it, the Canon 7S? They made a variant of it that did have a shoe. But most of the Canon 7s don't have a shoe. Great camera. Whether or not the meter works or not, who cares? It's got the titanium shutter, so you're never going to have pinholes. It's very reliable, excellent ergonomics, excellent viewfinder. If you have one of the Canon lenses of the correct era, excellent optics too. So I feel like that's a camera that I should be shooting more because it's just so good.
And it's still beautiful. That's a beautiful design.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then the last thing I'll say too is most people know this, but if you don't and you're looking for one and you see that the shutter has a couple wrinkles on it, that's a non-issue. Most of them do. Normally you don't want to see imperfections in a shutter curtain, but that's one rare example of a camera where if you see a couple, and I'm talking wrinkles, like if there's tears, obviously that's bad. But if you're inspecting a Canon 7 at an estate sale and you look at the shutter and you see a couple wrinkles, that's not a reason not to buy it. It's fine. Most of them have that. This was fun. This is a good episode. I think we covered Ricoh pretty good. Did we cover every model they ever made? No. We talked about the Pentax 17 last episode, which is made by Ricoh because Ricoh owns Pentax now. So, well, I started off this episode saying how Fuji and Ricoh have more in common than you'd think. They kind of started the same way. In a weird sort of way, they're still going the same way they are even back then, in that they still make stuff. Like I don't know that there's been a Ricoh branded camera worth buying. And well, that's not true. The GR digital cameras are quite good too. So I'll correct myself right there. But yeah, I mean, Fuji, so many great medium format cameras. I love their rangefinders, the V2, the Compact Deluxe, the 35 EE-SE-ML, all great cameras. I'm not gonna lie, Bob. I'm probably gonna be buying an AX, because you kept talking about them. The AX5 or something like that, because you hyped
They're
it up
really,
too much.
you'll get it for nothing, I'm sure.
Yeah, probably. The ST801, Howard says he loves it. I love that camera as well.
Yep.
What else? So many good
And you
ones.
have your Mini
Yeah, I have the Mini. Yep, right here. Here it is.
in the pile.
Right. We haven't talked about what we're going to do for the next show. I think we've covered all the things we wanted to talk about recently, so we're just going to have to come up with something new. If you guys want to hear any particular brands or topics or anything you guys like to hear us talk about, please let us know. Engage with us on the Facebook page and the Discord server. We recently hit our 200,000th download for the podcast, which I think is a great achievement. I don't know if that's good or not, though. Most podcasts don't talk about their listeners, so maybe we should be higher. Maybe that's really good. I really don't know.
Could be one person that listens 200,000 times too. So.
That's my mom. No, I'm just kidding. We will record our next episode on Monday, July 22nd, and then you're going back to Arizona after that, right, Paul?
Right. So we'll take off for a week or two.
We'll all be here on the 22nd, but we don't know what we're going to talk about. So please let us know what you want to hear. Check us out on Instagram, Facebook, on my page. You can comment. Discord has been really active lately. We love hearing from you guys. So thank you guys for coming. Howard, Brad, Bob, great to have you back on the show. Mark's still here. Dan had to drop off. A few other people had to drop off. So see you guys next time.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Thank
good night,
you.
everybody.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Are we recording? We are. Yes,
Okay.
we are.
Zoom is no longer Zoom. It's Zoom Workplace, at least on my laptop. And while it works basically the same, all the buttons are in different spots. So it's like sometimes I have to stop and look.
Do you know there's a button down the bottom that says AI Companion?
Yeah.
And I'm actually just wondering if that's actually when we press that, we get Mark Faulkner pop up.
Get clippy. Recording in progress, please.